College football joining you for a live stream late Friday night. It's just about midnight Eastern time. And if you haven't caught the videos from the past few days, great live discussions with Andrew Hutchinson earlier today from Hog Beat, the Rivals platform for Arkansas football. We discussed the Hogs, of course, and Will Gunter from 107.5 The Game, Columbia, South Carolina. We talked a bit about the Gamecocks and some of the recruiting efforts recently from Will Muschamp, but most notably, we looked at dark horse selections across the country for the college football playoff and really kicked around the betting issue based on the Supreme Court decision from earlier this week, and also talked about the impact and legacy of Mike Slive, former SEC commissioner who passed away earlier this week at the age of 77. Also, Shireen Ryan with a very fun conversation that we had this afternoon talking Arizona football and some recent territorial cup rights and some challenges and some issues and some trash talking and some fisticuffs of sorts between the Sun Devils and the Bear Down Wildcats. That was a fun conversation as well. Over the past few days, we have had tons of college football discussion with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, and also analysis from myself, as we have recently carved through conference scheduling in the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. We left alone the Big 12 because everybody plays everyone. So the conference schedule is just fine in the Big 12. For the other conferences, it needs to be fixed. And we laid the hammer to the conference schedules for 2018 and shattered them to smithereens and let you know how it should be scheduled to provide equity, fairness, and balance to the schedule across the board. We're going to next attack non-conference scheduling. We've also looked at future schedules, which if you look at the title of this particular segment, you see that we're looking at the Pac-12 tonight. I have knocked out the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC, and also the Pac-12, or also the Big 12 future schedules. It's fun to look down the road over the next 10 seasons and see what contracts have been signed and what heavyweights are getting together. And for those teams that are too afraid to go out there and schedule tough, I got tough with them. Brutal scheduling out of the likes of many of the programs that we have jumped on in the past, the likes of Iowa and Baylor and Kansas and others who continue to refuse to schedule anyone out of conference. So please check out those videos for the discussion. And of course, has been the case here on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. In recent weeks, we have recorded everything live. So everything streams out live, excluding some of my personal analysis, but all the conversations that I have with bloggers, broadcasters, and writers, those go out live because I want to engage you, the viewer. And I've got a core right there that is just beyond belief in regards to your support. I appreciate it. The comments keep me going. Just your engagement in talking college football, period, especially in the middle of May. I know that you guys are the hardcore college football fans to be awaiting the season and can't get enough of the discussion, the debate, and the analysis as we head toward the summer and get ready for the first week of August. Of course, the big news today, Joe Burrow makes it official in his transfer to LSU. We will speak with Matt Moscona of ESPN Baton Rouge and ESPN New Orleans about that Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern time. That discussion will be live, so bring your comments and questions right here to Mark Rogers TV, 1 o'clock Eastern time on Monday with Matt Moscona of ESPN Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We're checking out right now Pac-12 schedules in the future. We've looked at the schedules for 2018. We're going to look at the non-conference scheduling for the various Pac-12 schools, as this conference needs to play better out of conference after a 1-7, a brutal showing, 1-7 against the other power leagues this past postseason, most notably against the Big Ten in losing to Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State, and also Purdue. So they lost all those matchups to the Big Ten, and they got the one win that would have been Utah defeating West Virginia without Will Greer. The Utah Utes saving the Pac-12 from complete embarrassment in the postseason this past season. So the Pac-12, a very fine conference just a few years ago, maybe the weakest of the Power Five. I would certainly rate it currently, despite depth. The credit goes to the Pac-12 for having decent depth, as they have forever. And also, outside of Oregon State, no real dog programs like Purdue was a couple years ago, like Illinois currently is, like Kansas currently is, the gold standard for the dog programs in Power 5 play. Syracuse to a lesser extent. And North Carolina had an awful season, but the program is in decent shape with Larry Fedora. But those are the truly bad programs in the Power 5, and Oregon State is right there, looking to correct that with Jonathan Smith at the helm. All right, let's dive into Pac-12 future schedules. And if you'd like to discuss that, certainly I'll be monitoring the live chat as well. But if you've got anything concerning college football, I am monitoring and will answer those questions and comments. And if you got suggestions for content or contributors that you would like to see as guests here at Mark Rogers TV, leave those names as well. In addition, this is all I'm going to say, coming up soon, Rivalry Week on Mark Rogers TV. That's all I'm going to say. I'll leave the mystery out there. It shouldn't be too big of a mystery of what we're going to focus on during Rivalry Week, but just an idea that hit me today. Rivalry Week, Mark Rogers TV. All right. I'm going to check out Cal's future schedule, and then I'm going to go to the live chat to see if you guys have anything late on a Friday night. All right, for the Golden Bears coming up in 2018, it's North Carolina at BYU and Idaho State. So I can't get too excited about that, but considering Cal, I think that's plenty for them. And I think considering that BYU is the equivalent of a Power 5, them playing 2 Power 5s is a good thing for Cal, and it's definitely respectable. Playing North Carolina at home, they have met the Tar Heels in recent years already, so that's an extended home-and-home series. And then also the game against BYU, a pretty decent regional matchup for the Golden Bears. And then they've got Idaho State as well. In 2019, they go to Ole Miss. So Cal just played Ole Miss this past season. They've played the Rebels home and home a couple times now, i.e. just like North Carolina. So they've got the return trip to Oxford coming up in 2019 after playing UC Davis in North Texas. So Cal playing an SEC team, what appears to be a mid-level SEC team at this point, coming off the 6-6 season under Matt Luke. Decent game there for Cal. All right, in 2020, it's UNLV on the road. It's Cal Poly, but it's also TCU at home. So a nice get for Cal to try to work up to a point in 2020 in which they would be able to make it a game against TCU. TCU coming to Cal Berkeley in 2020. In 2021, it's the return trip to TCU. It's also Sacramento State and Nevada. In 2022, it's UC Davis, North Texas, and UNLV. So this is the type season and schedule that needs to be avoided by everybody in the Power 5, and certainly should. There is less of a room for error if you're playing in the Big Ten, the Pac-12, or the Big 12, because they only play 3 non-conference games. There's absolutely no excuse for anyone in the ACC or the SEC with 4 non-conference games. But with 3 non-conference games, everybody in the Power 5 needs to play at least 1, and I am campaigning for 2 Power 5 games. And to come out with a schedule of UC Davis, North Texas on the road, and UNLV is a bit embarrassing for Cal in 2022. Now, considering that they've loaded up on Power 5 games elsewhere, I'm thinking that maybe there was a contract and a series that was that broke down between them and somebody else. Maybe there was a series that somebody left that had been scheduled. All right, Auburn in 2023. That's a good one at home. Auburn going all the way across the country. So we're seeing the SEC finally leaving the South to play some games on the West Coast. Georgia goes to UCLA. Auburn going to Cal. We see that Auburn is going to Penn State as well. So in 2023 for the Golden Bears, it's Auburn at home and it's at San Jose State. So Cal is a Power 5 team, unlike some other Power 5 teams, not afraid to go on the road to take on a group of five. They do it against San Jose State, against North Texas, and Nevada as well. So in 2024, UC Davis and Auburn on the road. That'll be obviously a difficult trip for Cal going on the road to the plains of Auburn. In 2025, it's UNLV. It's also UNLV on the road in 2026. So those years past 2021 are opportunities for Cal to continue to schedule in the non-conference. So we'll see what kind of agreements they come up with. Let's check out the live chat and see if you guys have anything for me on the live chat as we check out the discussion. So hopefully you guys have something to say about SEC future schedules. I'm a bit loopy possibly tonight. Pac-12 future schedules is what we're talking about. And yeah, there's a lot on here. You guys are going to town here. Ryan's on the line. Good to see you, Ryan. George as well. Go Gators. Big Poppy JT. What's up? What is up? All right. What else do we have? Go SEC. Go Michigan. Go. Don't understand why the USC Trojans can't recruit a bunch of five-star kids from Florida. Go Dogs. Go Wildcats. Go Frogs. Don't know where you're going, Ryan. So you're going to have to fill me in. We're talking Dogs, meaning Georgia by the spelling. We're talking Kentucky Wildcats. We're talking Frogs as in TCU. That's all I can go with there. Ryan, I love the new live discussions. Had a hard time keeping up with the 33-minute videos every day. Yeah, that was difficult to do. It was also difficult to edit. So I'm going to lose views this way. You guys understand that when I had a 30-minute discussion with one of my guests and I would chop that down into 5 segments, for those people that just wanted to see, let's say, the quarterback battle discussion, that made it very nice for them. Now they've got to go searching for it within a 30-minute discussion. So I'm not really helping myself out very much, but I'm helping out my personal life in particular, so I don't have to edit all these zillions of videos because it was crazy. I compared last April's numbers to this April's numbers. Last April, I produced 195 videos. That's nuts. 195 videos in a month. And that's probably not the highest output for a month. And probably one of the reasons at this time of night I can't talk. I say Pac-12 or SEC when I mean Pac-12. But I appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks so much. So the reason I'm doing this is to halt the editing and to focus on other things personally, but also in terms of the business and what I have planned for this setup. But more importantly, and mostly the reason that I'm doing it is to get you guys involved in the discussion. So instead of just seeing a video that's already posted and responding to the comments, and you guys know that I try to get to as many comments as possible. This way we can talk it up right live in the moment. And when you've got the guests on, you guys can respond to what they're saying and leave your comments and questions. So I like it too, Ryan. I'm glad that you do as well. Big Poppy JT, because kids like me don't want to go to USC and wait on the bench. Mark, you should offer to do the scheduling for the top 100 teams for $1 million a year and hire the necessary assistants to get that job done. I'm sure the NCAA would be down for that. I'm thinking that would be a cheap offer, that they would certainly jump at the chance for me for a mere 7 figures to figure out the scheduling for them. Just show them the videos. Don't need a resume. Don't need any type of other verification. Just show them the videos off of YouTube And I think that they would be completely sold, George. I agree with you. I need to jump on that quickly. Dennis, Mark Rogers, Miami coming to get that transfer. We will be talking Miami football. So I've got a large Miami contingent. We all know that. I would love to be able to replicate that with other fan bases. So I'm working on that. So I'm not going to let down my Miami viewers, but believe me, even if I uh, start targeting Wisconsin and I'm only getting 25 views for video, per video, I'm not going to give up on the Badgers. If you follow the logic here, I'm trying to replicate the fan base for other major teams that just those fan bases haven't found me, like a lot of Miami fans, USC, Ohio State to a lesser degree. So I digress here. There was a reason I said all that. George can't wait for the Miami Florida game. Yes, the Pac-12 is overrated. Overrated by whom? Who is out there, Big Poppy, that's saying the Pac-12 is good? I'm trying to process this comment. Is there anybody out there saying that the Pac-12 is good? I don't know who those people are. I talked to even Pac-12 people. The guests from the Pac-12 that I have on even know that the conference is down. So you can say that the Pac-12 is down. I don't know that you can say it's overrated. Overrated by Larry Scott, possibly. I think he would be the entire list of people overrating the Pac-12. The Pac-12 isn't overrated. Don't try to take those people's lies away from them. Pretend it's a real football league. I used to call the Pac-12 the best flag football league in America when I would get into conversations, and this was more like 20 years ago when there was certainly, when the Pac-12 looked more like the Big 12 did 5 years ago, when it was an embarrassment to watch defensive play in the Pac-12 where guys were shying away from tackles, didn't want to stick their nose in there. The blown coverages didn't even force a quarterback to make decent throws or wide receivers running free in the secondary like every other play. It was embarrassing by a lot of teams in the Pac-12. So my comment to Pac-12 fans was always, you've got a great league. It's got to be the best flag football league in America. Oregon State is awful. Yes, Ryan. Scheduling should be done every year in the off season with you as the czar of scheduling. George, you have missed your calling, man. What you need to do, and what we could do is I could sign up for you as my PR guy now and pay later. If you can deliver on the promises, then I will certainly be good for the payment. I don't know that I can pay it up front, though. All right. George loves Oregon State. They beat USC's ass when USC was #1 and let Florida win the national title that year. Yes, they did. That was in 08. One of those tremendous Pete Carroll teams that should have most likely won the national championship really beat up on Penn State in the Rose Bowl. Big Poppy JT, how did Oregon State fall off so bad? That's a discussion for another day. We did have Gary Anderson on twice when he was the head coach at Oregon State. That's another thing that you guys probably missed in not watching me a few years ago, is that I have had on about 12 or 13 FBS head coaches, but it's just so time consuming to try to track those guys down and play phone tag and email tag with the sports information directors. I would love to get coaches on here, but it really takes away from what I do on a daily basis, but would like to get back at that and bring on some recruits. Are you guys big on having recruits come on to the show? Let me know if you are. That was something I hit really hard a year ago, going into the 2017 signing period. I brought on a ton of top 300 ESPN 300 guys for interviews. Go Gators. Ain't did dilly poop giant. I can't. Yeah. Okay, Dennis. All right. What do we got here? Anything else? A lot of Florida talk. Florida, Miami going back and forth. Dennis and George. 2 Gator commits Tuesday. You guys are going back and forth about Miami and the Florida Gators, trying to get a scholarship so I can play football for Vandy or UCLA. All right. Good stuff, boys. All right. Let's get back to the future schedules. We knocked out Cal. I was pretty impressed with the Golden Bears, aside from 1 or 2 years where they didn't play a Power Five, but love the home and home with Auburn. For them to go out there and do that is really nice. They've got the series clincher with Ole Miss after they've already played the Rebels last season, and of course North Carolina finishing up that series as well. And the TCU home and home's a nice one for Cal. Let's look at Oregon. Okay, we're talking about a program that has probably fallen like no other in the Power Five in the past 3 years, playing in a national championship in 2014, of course, and then just 2 years later, they're a 5-17. Rebounded to a certain extent to get to the Las Vegas Bowl, losing to Boise State this past year. Let's see what the Ducks have. Nothing this year. So this shouldn't happen again. 2018 for Oregon, Bowling Green, Portland State, and San Jose State. They don't even go on the road, and they play no one. Okay. 2019, we've got a rematch almost 10 years later of the Auburn-Oregon National Championship game, this time not in Phoenix, but in Arlington, Texas at Jerry's World. So I'll look forward to that one. Auburn, Oregon, 2019, also Nevada and Montana. In 2021, it's North Dakota State, Ohio State, and Hawaii. So rematch of the championship game from 14, also a rematch of the 2010 Rose Bowl, Buckeyes winning both of those games. 2021 at Ohio State at the Shoe, sandwiched by Fresno State and Stony Brook. So you schedule Auburn, Ohio State, somebody like that, you get the free pass on the other two games to a certain extent, even though I would love to see the two Power Five games. And I promise I will pull together the video in which I will unveil my non-conference scheduling. All right. 2022, we got Eastern Washington and BYU. 2023, so something needs to give there. We need to fill in the gap. The slot needs to come with somebody respectable. In 2022 for Oregon, they've got Eastern Washington and BYU. Now, most likely, they're going to go after a group of five type team to fill out that schedule, but they should schedule a Power Five and not just say BYU's our Power Five, even though they generally are. Would like to see another good game for Oregon in 2022. In 2023, they go to Texas Tech. So that's the series, the home and home there. Oregon, Texas Tech, that's decent. 2023-24. And in 23, they also have Portland State and Hawaii. They also have a home and home that they've scheduled with Baylor. So you've got the dueling lime greens, neon greens going at it, Baylor and Oregon, 2027 and 28. All right. You guys have anything else here? Pac-12 is good amongst itself, whatever that means, meaning when they play themselves. So George, do me a math problem here and go to each and every conference schedule and add up the wins and losses in the conference. So if you follow me, you're going to get the same number for every conference. All right. Baylor sucks. I just love those comments. The Pac-12 is good amongst itself. Got that. All right. We scheduling a lot of people now. Right. Hey, Mark, did you hear about Alabama and Texas playing a home and home 2022-23? Certainly did, Ryan. And unfortunately, our appearance with Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama today had to be canceled. Stephen was having tech issues. We started a conversation yesterday in which we talked about Nick Saban's comments about Central Florida making claims to win the national championship in 2017. And I also wanted to talk to Stephen about the Texas and USC contracts for the Tide and also some recruiting. We didn't get to it last night. We scheduled 6 o'clock Eastern today, but had some technical issues. But we wanted to talk Alabama and Texas. Obviously, if they played today, Alabama would be a 17 or 20 point favorite, and rightfully so. Texas would put up maybe some semblance of a fight, but hopefully Tom Herman will have that program in place 4 years from now if he's still the coach, to be able to take on Alabama and have it truly be an Alabama-Texas type meeting that we saw at the national championship with Colt McCoy leaving the field, of course, early in the game in favor of Garrett Gilbert, who had a few flashes and scared the Tide in the fourth quarter before Alabama put it away. Bama got a recruit today. UCF was robbed. They should have destroyed Alabama. Mark Richt got a real chance to win a natty now in the hotbed at Miami. If Alabama's so good, why do they produce so many busts? Well, we're talking about two different things here, Big Poppy. We're talking about production at the collegiate level versus production at the National Football League. So you've got some schools historically like North Carolina, Purdue. I actually had the list here earlier leading into the NFL draft where I was analyzing what schools currently produce the best NFL players. And one of the teams we just talked about, Cal, with 32 current NFL players, and not just the number, but the quality of players is off the charts, starting with Aaron Rodgers, of course, Keenan Allen, and others. But they don't do anything at that level. They're not winning at the collegiate level, but they produce good pros. The Alabama has had some disappointments, but they're still churning out good players and certainly volumes of players to the next level. But I don't think Nick Saban's too concerned about that. He wants to win while they're in Tuscaloosa. If you guys can hang on 2 seconds, I will be back in like 10 seconds. Talk amongst yourselves. All right, we can put that on the blooper reel. It's a little behind the scenes, checking on the Rogers household here. Ryan, if Oklahoma and UCF played in 2017, then they would have scored 150 points scored. Something in that range, most likely, just like the UCF South Florida game was very entertaining the two times that they met last season, especially in the championship game. That was really good stuff. Let's see who Mark Richt run out the ACC. All right. When the grammar goes, then I need to leave those comments alone because I can't follow them. Let's get back to the Pac-12 futures schedules. We've knocked out Cal and Oregon. Let's go to the all right, the mighty Beavers of Oregon State coming off that fine 0-9 campaign in 2017. And the losing should continue. Week 1 at Ohio State, 2018, Southern Utah, and at Nevada. So I don't know who's doing the scheduling for Oregon State. I certainly like them going to the shoe to take on the Buckeyes. Nothing wrong with that. And they don't get the return trip from Ohio State. So this shows total disrespect. What other school? Find me another series of contracts in which two Power 5 teams are playing non-conference and they don't share a home and home or a neutral and a neutral, kind of i.e. LSU, Wisconsin playing at Lambeau, then playing at Reliant Stadium. Give me one of these. This is the position Oregon State's in, that they have to go to Columbus to play Ohio State, but they don't get the return trip. Find me another Power 5 future schedule where a Power 5 school is willing to go somewhere and play, but is not getting the return game. That's funny. All right, 2019, it's Oklahoma State. That's at home, at Hawaii and Cal Poly. It's Oklahoma State on the road in 2020, so that's a nice series for Oregon State. Hopefully they can show us something by then, with back-to-back games against Oklahoma State in 2019 and 20, Colorado State and Portland State as well in 2020. In 2021, this is a nice little back and forth with Purdue and Oregon State. Playing in 2021 And the Beavers also have Hawaii and Idaho. In 2022, you got Boise State at Fresno State and Montana State. And so, even though that's not a Power 5 game, Boise State, we're going to put them in the same class as a mid-tier Power 5 team, a upper to mid-tier, something in that range, a fourth or fifth place team typically, most of the time for Boise. Boise hosting Oregon State in 2023, and the Beavers also have San Diego State. They've got Purdue for the return trip in 2024 and also Fresno State. They've got a home and home with Texas Tech. So Texas Tech really eyeing the Pac-12 in future seasons. They've played Arizona State in recent years. They have more games with Arizona State. They've got Arizona. They also have Oregon and Oregon State. So again, it's the Beavers and the Red Raiders in 2025 and 26, and also Oregon State goes to San Jose State twice. And that's also a San Diego State game in 2026. So enough on Oregon State. The big trips are to Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Purdue, and Boise State, with return trips from all those teams except for the Buckeyes. Not surprisingly, not going to go to Corvallis and play a Power 5 team. All right, let's go to Stanford. This should be interesting. Stanford, who have they played in recent years? They played Kansas State a couple of years ago. Of course, typically the series with Notre Dame goes back and forth every other year, South Bend and Palo Alto. And so that's been the big non-conference game for Stanford in particular. And again, they did play Kansas State on a Friday night to open the 2016 season. And yes, they've got Kansas State, I believe, coming up soon as the return trip to Manhattan. So for this season, 2018, Stanford has revenge on its mind, taking on San Diego State. They lost to the Aztecs last year. They've got them at home this year. They've got UC Davis, and they go to Notre Dame after defeating the Fighting Irish at home this past season. In 2019, here's another team that Stanford has played recently. They played at Northwestern, remember, losing, being upset by the Wildcats early in the season, game 1. That was like 2016, 2015. So they get the return trip from the Wildcats to start out 2019. They also go to UCF. So there's a nice little matchup. Stanford at Central Florida, like that game, and Notre Dame. So hold up. You're not going to see too many schedules this difficult out of conference. So even though there's one group of 5 in there, it's Central Florida. Stanford in 2019 is playing Northwestern, Notre Dame, and Central Florida on the road. Stanford, good for you. 2020, they've got William and Mary and Notre Dame on the road in BYU. In 2021, they finally make that return trip to Kansas State. They've got Vandy on the road. They've got Notre Dame. So in 2021, again, Stanford not taking it easy against anybody. They have no cream puffs on the schedule, no FCS, no group of 5. They've got Kansas State on the road. They got Vandy on the road. They've got Notre Dame, David Shaw, and most likely his athletic director more so, scheduling difficult. More games against Notre Dame every year, so just plug that in for every year. Notre Dame, Stanford through 2025. They also have BYU in 22 and 23. They also have Vandy again in 2025. They go to Vanderbilt twice in 2021 and 25, and they've got 2 games with Vandy in Stanford in 24 and 27. And then a nice little matchup with TCU, home and home in 2024 and 27. Of course, Stanford and TCU played one of the more entertaining bowl games at the Alamo Bowl. Stanford jumped out 21-3, and the Horned Frogs were too quick and too fast and came back and won it, despite a valiant game and effort from the injured Bryce Love, 39-37. TCU. And so TCU and Stanford hit the field again in 2024 and 27. And there's a home and home with Stanford and Boston College in 2028 and 29. Let's check out the live chat. I'm probably about 48 comments behind. We got Derek Shear on the line. Look at that. You found us, Derek. Appreciate that. Mark, it's a little late on the East Coast, my friend. Time for bed for most people, but you love your college football. Yeah, we're not anywhere close to bedtime right now, Derek, but I appreciate you looking out for my health. Dennis, I'm not even going to try to dive into all this Florida Miami nonsense that you guys are spitting back and forth, but I do appreciate it and I do enjoy it. As you mentioned here, fill in Stanford, good for them. Twice they play basically 3 straight Power Fives. No FCSs, no group of fives. Will include Central Florida the one time. David Shaw is one of the most underrated coaches in college football. Jim Harbaugh set it up for him. He has not let the program wane. And considering all the challenges that Stanford has in recruiting because of the academic standards, and we hear it all the time, but it is legitimate, it's valid, it's the truth. That is the most difficult place to recruit to based on the standards. Obviously, a ton of kids and most likely their moms and dads really would love them to go to Stanford, but they just can't make it in the door. Vanderbilt, Northwestern, Duke to a lesser degree, but Stanford, what they do playing football at that level, being one of the top, what would you say? I say it's one of the top 10 to 15 programs in America and has been since the end of the Harbaugh era, is pretty remarkable. All right. They will not win a national title. I would say that if we're looking at the next 10 to 15 years, yeah, if somebody held a gun to my head, if I had to place a wager, yes, I don't believe that Stanford will win a national championship, but considering their position in the Pac 12 and considering that you would think that the Pac 12 and the Big 12 are right now the two leagues that are positioned the worst to gain a spot into the college football playoff, despite what happened with the Big 10 this past season. Those are the two leagues that have been left out of the playoff the most in its brief history. And unless something drastically changes, that probably will continue. So think of it this way, there's an 80% chance, take Notre Dame out of the mix, there's an 80% chance that any league is going to make the playoff because you got 4 spots and you've got 5 leagues. So you've got an 80% chance on the surface of making the playoff. But we know that that's not the case. We know it's not even. We know the Pac-12 and the Big 12 have a bit of a hill to climb versus the SEC given preference. The ACC and the Big 10 kind of in the middle, evaluated fairly. The SEC is going to be given a bit of a bye at this point. Again, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 have some work to do, and they got to be overwhelming. But Stanford is going to win that league its share of the time. And if they win the league, they get into the playoff. Anything's possible. But yeah, I would find it very difficult for the projected 3 or 4 times, let's say Stanford makes the college football playoff field in the next 15 years. Let's say they make it 3 to 4 times. Most likely, are they going to beat 2 of the best teams in college football? Are they going to make a run against Ohio State and Alabama or Clemson and Alabama or Oklahoma or fill in the blank, Georgia or somebody else and win the national championship? Most likely, yes. I would agree with your comment that most likely Stanford will not win a national championship despite their status as a solid top 10 to top 15 program. There are going to be way too many good to elite teams in the Big Ten to not get a team into the playoffs. You would think, Ryan, but the perfect storm for the other leagues, or the imperfect storm for the Big Ten, would be a lot of 10-2 teams coming out of the Big Ten, and that would not be good news for the conference. But you could certainly see it with the strength of Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, and many of those teams having to play Wisconsin. And then you jump in a few upsets with the likes of Iowa and Northwestern pulling off possibly an upset or two. And suddenly you're looking at a lot of 2 and 3 loss teams, and that would not be good. Of course, for the Big Ten, they need to win the huge games out of conference to put their teams in position to make the claim with 2 losses. So Michigan State needs to win its matchup with whoever they're playing this year. I don't remember. I think it's Arizona State. That's not so crucial. But the Ohio State TCU matchup, the Michigan Notre Dame matchup, the Penn State Pitt, well, that should be a given. The Nittany Lions should be in good shape there. And Wisconsin, again, it doesn't play anyone. Their matchup against BYU is their big game. All right. We hit Stanford, and I love the Stanford scheduling. Let's go to Washington, which bothered me 2 years ago when they made the playoff and played in the weakest conference in America. Lost to the best team in the league, USC, even though USC did not win the league. I felt that they were the best team, the team that won the Rose Bowl. And Washington lost by 2 scores at home against USC. They went up against an overmatched Colorado team that was not very good, that got blitzed and annihilated by Oklahoma State in the Alamo Bowl. And so their non-conference biggie that year was Rutgers, and Washington somehow made it into the playoff. Yes, I know that they had the record and they had the conference championship, so it was difficult to leave them out of the playoff, and I would have put them in the playoff just because I believe in track record and resume rather than who's are the 4 best teams. Who do we think they are? But Washington showed that they didn't belong that year. They do have Auburn in Georgia, in Atlanta on September 1st. Looking forward to that game. North Dakota and BYU are the other 2 non-conference games this year. 2019 for Washington is Eastern Washington, Hawaii, and at BYU. In 2020, they've got Michigan, Washington. So if you go back to the early 90s, Michigan, Washington played in back-to-back Rose Bowl games, with the Huskies winning the first one and the Wolverines the second, with Ty Wheatley running wild. And they also played in the Warren Moon days in the Rose Bowl in 1978, Washington upsetting Michigan, but the Wolverines came back in 1980 in the 81 Rose Bowl and beat Washington in a rout 23-6, if I remember the final score, which I typically do. Michigan, Washington to start 2020 should be a good one in Seattle. Also for the Huskies that year, Sacramento State and Utah State. In 2021, you've got Montana and the return trip to Ann Arbor to take on the Wolverines. All right, in 2022, Portland State, and then here's a big one, 2024 and 25, home and home, Washington, Ohio State. These 2 schools actually have quite a few games played against each other in their history, surprisingly so. Going back to, let's say, 1986, Ohio State ventured out to Washington in week 2 and got hammered by the Huskies 40-7. They played in 1993 and 94 and 95, with 2 of those games in Columbus. The Buckeyes won the 2 games in Columbus in 93 and 95. Eddie George had a big game in 95. They won in 93. The Buckeyes finished 10-1-1 that year and tied for the Big Ten championship. The middle game in 1994, Ohio State went out to Seattle and lost early in the season 25-16. And then they got back together as the first game for the Buckeyes after winning the national championship in 2002. The opener of 2003, Washington at Ohio State. Buckeyes won that game fairly comfortably. And then they got together again in Seattle in 2007 with Todd Beckman at the helm against, I believe, would that have been Jake Locker at the time? And Ohio State won that game, not in a blowout, but fairly comfortably, something like 23-7. So Ohio State and Washington have quite the history. And who knows, maybe they'll meet in a playoff game. That certainly is a large possibility, but they will meet for sure in 2024 and 2025. Let's check out the live chat. SEC fans, you hate us because you ain't us. George, how can a SEC team be overrated when you lose to them every year? So you guys have lost me, but you guys are having a good time, it seems, talking amongst yourselves. So I love it. If you've got anything for me, certainly let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to carve through these schedules. Washington doing a decent job with Auburn. Ohio State, and Michigan. Good series there for the Huskies coming up in the next 7 or 8 years. Washington State. This program we could put basically in the Baylor, Kansas category of playing generally no one ever. I think that has been corrected to an extent. I'm expecting to see some weak schedules, but a little bit better than what we've seen in the last 10 years out of Washington State's program. Boise State would be about the best series that they've scheduled in recent years. All right. For the Cougars in 2018, this is they don't play anyone. It was worse than I thought. It was worse than I thought. I feared this, but I expected a little bit better out of the Cougars. Washington State, you are on my blacklist officially. Wazoo, this is awful. Washington State fans, I don't expect you to defend your football program. Your athletic director needs to buck up and schedule some games. Listen to this. This is Washington State. This is a team that's been ranked in the top 25 the past couple seasons, is coming off a couple Holiday Bowl appearances, won 10 games a couple years ago. They beat Miami 3 years ago in a bowl game at the Sun Bowl. They were annihilated by Michigan State, but still, they came down to the final game of the season the last 3 years with a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. And this is how they're scheduling. 2018, Wyoming on the road, San Jose State, Eastern Washington. 2019, New Mexico State, Northern Colorado, at Houston. At Houston is a respectable game. I like it, but that should be the secondary game. That shouldn't be the primary big matchup in the non-conference schedule. In 2020, it's more the same. Utah State, Houston, and Idaho. 2021 for Washington State. They play Utah State, Portland State, and BYU. In 2022, finally, Washington State at Wisconsin. And then they get the Badgers to come out to Pullman in 2023. They also have Colorado State, nice little secondary game in 2022 and 23. San Diego State on the road in 2024. They have San Diego State in 2025. They've got Idaho. Okay, the next big series. We've got 2 big series coming up for Washington State, and we've got to wait about 8 years. In 2026 and 27, they've got Boise State home and home. They have Kansas State home and home in 2026 and 29, and they also have a game at Kansas. So Washington State playing no one until 2022, and that's Wisconsin on the road, the first of a home and home. Badgers and Cougars. Washington State, I would have to double check on the Baylor schedule. I would have to double check on the Kansas schedule. And I do not give the Jayhawks a pass because they're awful. They play in the Big 12. They play in the Power 5. They need to schedule like that and not schedule OU as their, meaning Ohio U, as their big game every year. So Washington State has probably ascended to the top of my scheduling blacklist. Washington State. I got to tweet this out. The teams that should be embarrassed of their non-conference scheduling over the next 10 years. Washington State, boom, right there. And then the teams that should be proud. I need to start making a list. I'm going to go back. I'm going to make a list. I'm going to tweet this out, or maybe I'll just do a separate video talking about best non-conference scheduling, worst non-conference scheduling. Wazoo, awful. They're on the blacklist. The dreaded Mark Rogers TV scheduling blacklist. All right, what are you guys talking about here? Big Poppy JT going at it. If it wasn't for Dre Archer, I wouldn't even know who Kent State is. All right, Big Poppy JT. I believe you're a young guy from some of the comments that you've made. Kent State Jack Lambert, one of the greatest linebackers in the history of the NFL. Pittsburgh Steelers 4-time Super Bowl champion, one of the great, great hitters of all time at the linebacking position. Jack Lambert, look him up. Lou Holtz, Notre Dame, Arkansas, North Carolina State, South Carolina, William and Mary. Lou Holtz, national championship coach at Notre Dame, Kent State. Nick Saban, if you heard of him, Kent State. Josh Cribbs, all-time record holder as a punt and kickoff returner with the Cleveland Browns, Kent State. How about, I'm not coming up with the guy that just retired with the New England Patriots that was with the Pittsburgh Steelers forever, had a touchdown in the Steelers Super Bowl win against the Cardinals. James Harrison. Yes, James Harrison, Kent State. How about Antonio Gates, who will soon be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame? Big Poppy, am I helping you out at all here? Nick Saban, Lou Holtz, Jack Lambert, Antonio Gates, Josh Cribbs, Kent State, James Harrison. There you go. Didn't know about these guys, Mark. So, Big Poppy, we enjoy the engagement here. You're doing a great job. Love having you on here. I learn a lot from you. You learn from me as well. This is the give and take. You alert me to what's going on right now. I give you some history lessons along the way. All right, let's get back to the schedules. In the Pac-12, we have completed the North Division. Let's get to the South Division and Arizona. So just a few hours ago, I had Shireen Ryan on from Zona Zealots to talk Arizona football, and I was letting her know that the Wildcats have a bit of an opening in the South Division this year because they play the very worst schedule in the Pac-12. In the conference schedule, they play the 4 worst teams in the North Division, and they get a break in not playing Stanford and Washington for the second consecutive year. Let's see who Arizona plays in the non-conference. Well, basically nobody this year. BYU at Houston and Southern Utah. In 2019, at Hawaii, NAU, whoever that would be, North Atlantic, I don't know who that is, NAU, and Texas Tech. In 2020, for the Wildcats, they play Hawaii, Portland State, and Texas Tech on the road. So they're doing what would be expected of them. They're scheduling the 1 Power 5, and it's a pretty lifeless matchup, but it's decent. It's watchable. I'm going to watch Arizona play Texas Tech at 11 o'clock Eastern time on a Thursday or Friday night, even a Saturday night if nobody else is playing, nobody else to watch. Arizona plays BYU in Vegas in 2021, along with San Diego State and NAU. 2022, it's San Diego State on the road, Mississippi State. So here's a nice little home and home with Arizona taking on Mississippi State 2022 and 23. They have UTEP mixed in here along with North Dakota State, more NAU. That must be Northern Arizona University. That's who it is. Northern Arizona shows up a lot on the Wildcats schedule. They've got a home and home with Kansas State in 2024 and 25. They've got BYU. They've got Virginia Tech. So in 2029 and 30, Arizona, Virginia Tech. Now, there's absolutely no football history between those two schools, I can almost guarantee. But there is football history between Arizona and Nebraska. Arizona, Nebraska, they played in the Holiday Bowl late in the 90s, I believe in 1998, and I think Arizona won that game 23-20, and they met one other time in which Nebraska just annihilated them, but I can't come up with that game exactly. So they did play a couple times in the late 90s, early 2000s. Arizona, Nebraska, the Huskers and the Wildcats get together in 2020. 28-31. Boy, we're looking ahead. 2031. That's 13 football seasons away. Who knows what I'm going to be doing? We'll be holding the Mark Rogers TV 15-year YouTube anniversary season. And Colorado State's also on the schedule for Arizona in 2027-28. Back to the live chat. Florida will not compete. They still have too many holes. Florida should compete, y'all. Whole team return just about in scarlet back for y'all. Cash Boy D chiming in with the Gator talk. And of course, Jordan Scarlett is who he's referring to there. Johnny Manziel made y'all his pet dog. We're talking about one season, right? Johnny Manziel, the one game against Alabama in Tuscaloosa in 2012, a team that went on, speaking of Bama, to win the national championship that year. And then the return trip in 2013, Manziel had a big day statistically, but Bama turned him over several times, and it was a 49-42 Bama win at College Station. Those are the two Johnny Manziel games against Bama. The first one, famous. The second one, people forget. Alabama got a measure of revenge the next year, and really, the Johnny Manziel win in Tuscaloosa, when all was said and done, did not hurt Bama. They still went to the national championship game and won. Thank you, Go Babe, with the Northern Arizona reference there. To clarify there, I did finally figure it out. This being a roast session, that must have been during my Washington State tirade, or that might have been me roasting, not intentionally, Big Poppy. Understand that I was just trying to clarify the fine football history at Kent State University. And there may actually be somebody here in the conversation that graduated from Kent State. You never know. And Crosby, Stills, and Nash, they have some ties to Kent State. Let's not go through the history lesson now. All right. Finishing up the Pac-12 South, we talked Arizona. We got to go to Arizona State next. And if you enjoy some rivalry trash talking, you'll want to stay tuned in the next few weeks for Mark Rogers TV Rivalry Week. You may also want to check out my conversation with Shireen Ryan of Zona Zealots, as she talked about all kinds of recent mayhem between Arizona State and Arizona fans. All sort of rights issues and territorial issues concerning billboards and T-shirts and nightclubs, and quite the mess. All right, all in good fun, most of it. Now we're looking at, Arizona State. So they've got Michigan State on the schedule the next 2 years. They've got them at home this season in 2018, as they also take on Texas San Antonio and San Diego State. If you look at San Diego State's, I'm going to have to check out the Aztecs non-conference schedules, because this is reminding me of Kent State going through the SEC futures and the Big Ten futures and seeing Kent State all over the place. Kent State is playing Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Florida, all these teams, and they're playing a number of teams, of course, being from Ohio in the Big Ten as well. They are loaded up. I bet Kent State's non-conference schedule looks a whole lot better than Washington State's. And I would say the same for San Diego State, because we know that they've got a lot of Stanford and Washington and Oregon, and they are also on the Sun Devil schedule as well this season at San Diego State. And then in 2019, Arizona State takes on Kent State, Sacramento State, and Michigan State. So there's another Kent State game against a good team, Arizona State, in 2019. 2020, you've got the Sun Devils taking on Northern Arizona, UNLV on the road, and BYU. In 2021, they've got Louisiana Lafayette, UNLV, and BYU on the road. Okay, I got to call out that schedule as well as the 2020 schedule. Until I see more out of BYU, let's not put them quite in the favorable Power 5 category. So I would like to see Arizona State do better than Northern Arizona, UNLV, and BYU. And then the next season, taking on Louisiana Lafayette, UNLV, and BYU again. All right. Finally, a good matchup for Arizona State and possibly Herm Edwards. Do we think Herm Edwards is going to be around in 2022 to coach this football team as they take on Oklahoma State and, I guess, Mike Gundy? Mike Gundy in Arizona and Oklahoma State in 2022 and 23. That's the big game for Arizona State. They also take on, in those two seasons, Northern Arizona, Eastern Michigan, Southern Utah, and Fresno State. Let's see. The next big matchup for Arizona State would be home and homes with Mississippi State. So Mississippi State finding value for some reason in going out to Arizona and playing the Sun Devils and the Wildcats 4 times in the mid-2020s. So the home and home here is Arizona State, Mississippi State. Arizona State also taking on Wyoming, Texas State, and Northern Arizona those 2 seasons. And then we've got a nice little matchup, home and home, Arizona State, LSU, 2026 and 29. And the other matchups there, Arizona State going after San Diego State for some more fun with the Aztecs there in 2027 and 28. So they play San Diego State. I guess it's just 3 times in the next 10 years. But Arizona State's big matchups coming up. Michigan State the next 2 years, BYU a bunch of times, Oklahoma State 2022-23, Mississippi State in 24 and 25, and LSU in 26 and 29. Back to the live chat. What are you guys kicking around now? Oh, it's time to talk some N'Kosi Perry. It was only a matter of time before we would get to Miami and especially the quarterback position. George, hey, Ryan, if you don't do it, won't hurt my feelings. Boy, again, I can't even try to weed through this and see what we're talking about at this point. All right, but if you need more history lessons on Kent State football, I'm here for you. All right, let's get back to the Pac-12 schedules. And where are we? Colorado. Can't imagine that they've scheduled anyone. Here's another program that typically plays no one, unless we want to go back to the Cordell Stewart days in playing Miami and Michigan in particular. All right, and that's when they were in the Big 12. I do think they've got Nebraska coming up. Yes, there it is. In 2018 at Colorado State, of course. So that's a game that should be played every year. So I've got no issue with this. This is like Iowa State. Play every year, but just don't stop at that game. So Colorado, at least, in addition to playing Colorado State, they also go out and play Nebraska. And I know Colorado State's a group of 5, so it doesn't quite apply to the Iowa State situation. But Iowa and Iowa State fans, you have to be bored to tears in reviewing your team's schedule year to year because you know that the only big game that you're playing out of conference is going to be Iowa or Iowa State, and then you don't play anybody else because those 2 schools refuse to schedule anybody else. Iowa did schedule Pitt a couple years ago, home and home. But besides that, it's been nobody. Back to the Buffs with Colorado State in Denver this year, at Nebraska and New Hampshire. Then they've got Nebraska at home in 2019. They've got Colorado State again. They've got Air Force on the schedule. That's nice scheduling from Colorado. So they've got the rivalry game against Colorado State. They've got the old rivalry game against a current Big Ten team in Nebraska. And they've got Air Force, a quality group of 5 team in their own backyard. So that's going to create interest in the Denver area. In 2020, you got Colorado State, Fresno State, and Texas A&M. So there's a nice series there. So Colorado pulling through for me a little bit better than I anticipated, with a date at Texas A&M in 2020, and then taking on, this is nice, in 2021, they've got Texas A&M and Minnesota. So Minnesota at that point should be back to their 8-win self. We can only project. So in 2021, the Buffs have Texas A&M, Minnesota, and UMass. In 2022, they've got they start a series with a TCU, home and home. They've also got Air Force and Minnesota. So here we go. We've got a good schedule here. 2022, the Colorado Buffaloes play TCU, Air Force, and Minnesota. 2 of those games on the road. That's a nice non-conference schedule. TCU, Air Force, Minnesota. The next year, they still have to schedule their 3rd non-conference game, but listen to the first 2. Colorado's going to TCU and Nebraska. I have unfairly prejudged Colorado's scheduling without even looking at the future schedules. I knew that they had Nebraska coming up. I just assumed because they have not played anyone of note recently that, except for Michigan, they did go to Michigan a couple of years ago, that I just assumed Colorado was going to play no one. But playing TCU and Minnesota the same year, playing Texas A&M and Minnesota the same year, playing TCU and Nebraska the same year. All right, they've got more games with Nebraska. They've got Northwestern in 2027 and Kansas State. So in 2027, the Buffs play Kansas State and Northwestern. In 2025 and 26, they've got a home and home with Georgia Tech. So can somebody out there name me what is significant about Colorado and Georgia Tech? What is the connection? I'll leave it out there for a few minutes and see if anybody can come up with the obvious connection. If you know your college football history going back 25 to 30 years, Georgia Tech and Colorado connection. And then, so they've got Northwestern in 2026 and 27. They also have Kansas State again there in 2028. So Colorado, again, nice job. It's Nebraska 4 times, Texas A&M home and home, Minnesota home and home, TCU home and home, Georgia Tech home and home, Northwestern, and Kansas State home and home. Very well done. I'm going to check out one other schedule, then check out the live chat. And if you listen to the UCLA conversations I have on a regular basis with the likes of Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football, also Mike Regalado from Gojo Bruin, and Danielle Alvari, who's only been on the show once, but we're scheduled to have Danielle on again Wednesday night. You know that for some reason I'm fascinated with UCLA's program. I just think that this program, based on location and resources and name recognition, should be so much better than they are. We will see what Chip Kelly has in store. UCLA this year takes on Cincinnati, Oklahoma on the road, and Fresno State. Okay? Oklahoma again in 2019, along with San Diego State and Cincinnati on the road. So if Cincinnati gets back under Luke Fickell to what they typically are, which is a really, really, really good group of 5 program, that's a tough schedule potentially in 2019 for Chip Kelly. At Cincinnati, that's like going to Memphis, potentially, if Cincinnati gets its act together. That's like them going to Memphis this past year. They also have San Diego State, always tough, and Oklahoma. In 2020, UCLA needs to sign some contracts. They need to make some partners out there because they only have 1 game in 2020. That's at San Diego State. So here's more San Diego State. They're playing Arizona and Oregon and Washington State and Stanford and UCLA. In 2021, the Bruins take on LSU and Fresno State. They've got Michigan coming up in 2022 and 23, along with, of course, San Diego State on the road, Coastal Carolina in there, South Alabama, Bowling Green. The return trip at LSU in 2024, along with UNLV and Fresno State. Georgia, that's a nice series for UCLA in 2025 and 26. So the SEC, I have bashed the SEC forever for not traveling. outside of the South and mostly playing at non-conference neutral games. Finally, we're getting the SEC. Auburn going to Cal, Auburn going to Penn State, Georgia going to the West Coast to take on UCLA at the Rose Bowl. We've got LSU going to the Rose Bowl to take on UCLA. And of course, Texas A&M just did it and got Kevin Sumlin eventually fired, possibly because of the one additional loss and blowing the 34-point lead against the UCLA Bruins in Game 1 last year. Also for UCLA, there is more San Diego State, and they've got a home and home with Wisconsin. Wisconsin, UCLA. That's a cool series. 20, 29, and 30. Of course, those two teams played in the 90s twice in the Rose Bowl in 94 and in 99, with the Badgers winning both games. And they also won a Sun Bowl against UCLA. So the Bruins have some revenge and some makeup against the Badgers based on recent history there. Getting back to the live chat, what do we got? 1990, Miami embarrassed Texas in the Cotton Bowl. Yes, I believe that score was 46-3. I remember scores for some reason. Mark Richt got a turnover chain now. Bama playing Louisville this year. Lamar ran. He knew what's up. Don't necessarily know that factored into the Lamar Jackson decision, considering he was drafted in the first round, but I get your point. It would have been a much more fun game for us to watch and anticipate with Lamar Jackson going up against the Bama defense. This game should be about a 4-touchdown game, I'm expecting at this point. What else are you guys talking about? As a Bruins fan, I am not ready for these futures, but butt kickings. Go Halos 27. Yeah. Georgia, Michigan, LSU, and whoever else they have coming. Wisconsin snatched that chain. Pitt did too. Okay, the national title was split between the Colorado Buffs and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. So fill in, be honest. Did you look it up? Did you Google Georgia Tech and Colorado football? Or did you know that in 1990, Georgia Tech went undefeated? They actually played in the Citrus Bowl against Nebraska, a team that was ranked 12th or 13th in the country with 3 losses, and beat them to complete an undefeated season, a season at that point in which the ACC was not nearly as respected as currently, because those teams that we know now of being really good football programs like Clemson were not at the level that they currently are. And Florida State was not part of the league at that point. So the ACC was not viewed with the likes of the SEC and the Big Ten at that point. And what was the Big 8 and the Pac-10? But yes, Georgia Tech with Sean Moore at quarterback ran the table, beat Nebraska in the Citrus Bowl, split the national championship with Colorado, a team that infamously won or lost one game, tied a game, and then had the 5th down win against Missouri. So they actually lost 2 games and tied a game, should not have been placed in the position to win a national championship, in which they did against Notre Dame, a famous game in which Rocket Ismail returned a punt late in the game for an apparent touchdown for Notre Dame that most likely would have won the game for the Irish, but it was called back due to a questionable call. Notre Dame most likely again would have won the game, and Colorado, in a sense, if you count the 5th down play and the clip, may have lost 3 games with a tie and won the national championship. It's probably the weakest national championship in the history of college football, in addition to the 1984 BYU Cougars. Look this up if you're not aware of this. BYU with, was it Steve Young or was he gone? I believe Steve Young was gone in 83. I believe Steve Young played his last game in 83 against Missouri at the Holiday Bowl. In 84, I believe it was a Mark Wilson-led, trying to think who was the quarterback. Maybe it was Robbie Bosco was the quarterback at BYU in 84 that won 13 games, won the national championship. But listen to BYU's opponent in its bowl game to win the national championship. 6-6 Michigan. That's how screwed up the bowl system was then. If I would have been around and had this kind of platform at that point, talk about railing on the bowl system, I would have went ballistic. So, yes, BYU with a questionable national championship in 1984, and then Georgia Tech with one in 1990, even though theirs was more legitimate, having won all of its games against a weak schedule, as opposed to Colorado losing a game, tying a game, and almost, in a sense, losing two other games. Interesting stuff there, Big Poppy. Thanks for, no, that was fill in with the national championship split between Colorado and Georgia Tech. Trying to think who the coach is. I can't picture. I can picture, but I can't come up with the name of the Georgia Tech coach because he later coached the Detroit Lions. Bobby, name escapes me. I can't believe I can't remember his name. He went on after he won the national championship and he got the Lions job. Bobby Ross, who also later coached the San Diego Chargers in the Super Bowl against San Francisco. They got their butts kicked 49-26. And the coach for the Buffs, of course, was Bill McCartney. All right. What are you guys talking about now? George says, hey, Mark, why don't you sell advertising on your T-shirt and put somebody's logo on the pocket while you're drinking an iced tea or a Coke? Again, George, you're just way ahead of the game thinking of this stuff. I need to put you on staff. Clemson was obviously given up free pass on it being investigated. Cash Boy D, you guys are just going to it. Yeah. Dennis Wilson coming in with Bobby Ross. He's the reason Barry Sanders retired. Yes, he was the Detroit Lions head coach in 1997. Michigan, heart of somebody started going to a school like Clemson. You got to be kidding me. Mark, you heard about the incoming freshman from Botswana with 3.940 speed. He was going to go to UCLA, but he ain't have the test scores. Didn't hear about that. We'll have to do a special video on the guy with 3.940 speed. Amazing. Have yet to come across that note. All right, let's finish up with USC and Utah. So USC, probably the team that has the most popularity and attention here at Mark Rogers TV, and that's probably nationwide as well. This is the marquee flagship program for the Pac-12. And they've got two very difficult games, as we have talked about many times here at Mark Rogers TV, 2018 at Texas and Notre Dame. Of course, those are the two teams that they played this past season, getting by the Longhorns in double overtime. And Notre Dame blew out the Trojans 49-14 in South Bend. USC also plays UNLV to warm things up on September 1st. 2019, Fresno State, BYU, and Notre Dame. The BYU and Notre Dame games are on the road for USC. In 2020, they've got Alabama. So that game was just scheduled very recently in the last week. Alabama and USC get together in Arlington, Texas. This is an interesting situation. In addition to two marquee brands getting together, two complete powerhouses, the very tip top of the elite of college football all time getting together. But considering this being just 4 years removed from the last time that the same two teams got together at a neutral site in the very same stadium, a week before Sam Darnold finally got some action with Max Brown at quarterback and USC losing to Jalen Hurts in Alabama 1,000,000-0. What was it, 52-6? I expected a blowout, but nothing close to that. USC just could not compete. It would have been nice to have seen the two teams get on the same field months later. I still believe Alabama was the superior football team. In 2016. That was the team that lost the national championship game to Clemson, as opposed to the USC team that beat Penn State in a very entertaining Rose Bowl game. But I think 3 months later, with Sam Darnold in the lineup and playing well and USC maturing as a team, maybe that's an Alabama 42-31 win. It's an entertaining game, but Bama decidedly the tougher team, the more balanced and the deeper team. So again, they get together in 2020 at Arlington Stadium, Cowboys Stadium, and also in 2020, USC's got New Mexico and Notre Dame. So they've got Notre Dame every year. And really the only other significance to the future schedules for USC is a lot of BYU for some reason in 2021 and 2023. I thought there was more than that. I guess just 2 games against BYU. And they also have Fresno State coming up a number of times, as USC is want to play Fresno State 2019, 2022, and 25 against the Bulldogs. And of course, Notre Dame is scheduled through 2023. Back to the chat. Are you ever going to interview that gal Steely from USC again? Fill in. The young lady's name is Keely. Keely Yor. It is an unusual name, so I'll set you straight on that one. Keely. And yes, I've contacted her and Ryan Abraham with USCfootball.com. They're great at what they do. They're extremely busy. If you check out their YouTube channel for USC football coverage, you'll see that she's doing reports like every day. So it's been difficult to track them down and find a time to get together with Keely and with Ryan, but we will continue to attempt to do so. They're great about getting back to me, but they're always just flooded with so much to do. They also had a big court case recently with, I can't think of the USC player who was on trial, former USC player, but they've been reporting on that as well, and that's really tied them down. Big Poppy JT, Mark Rogers, will UCF be the next Boise State? Well, there has been a coaching transition at UCF. There were several coaching transitions during the Boise State run that started with Houston Nutt really establishing that program as a program on the rise. And they were able to build the program to a degree in which it didn't matter that they lost head coaches, because they always replaced them with the next guy that was able to take the reins. And that's going to be key for UCF. And it starts here with Josh Heupel. We know that his football acumen is good enough to scheme and to coach players individually and within units. We don't know if he's a CEO yet. So there's the difference there. We know Josh Heupel knows the game. He knows how to teach it and instruct it. He knows how to set up the X's and O's. We just don't know if he knows how to run a football program and be the guy in dealing with all the things that you have to deal with and being the figurehead of sorts. And I don't say that in a negative connotation, but being the face of the program rather than just a coordinator who gets to go off and just coach football and watch film and scheme. So I can't answer that question. My gut feeling would be that UCF's going to be a player, not to the degree of Boise State or not to the degree of the heights that they reached this past season, but they're going to continue to be in the Boise State, Houston, Navy realm of consistently winning 8, 9, 10 games and being a major player within the group of 5, and sometimes jumping up and knocking off a big Power 5 and getting the opportunity on occasion to play in the New Year's Six. If you never grew up in Alabama or Florida or Georgia or Mississippi or Louisiana or Texas, you would have a hard time understanding why those players will always be the best of the best. Murray might go to the major leagues. We're talking about Kyler Murray at Oklahoma. It was cool when the Pac-12 was good. Hang around, fill in. things change. The Pac-12, when I did the analysis following the 2014 season, if you just looked at the results against the rest of the Power Five, the Pac-12, this is tough to believe, just a few years later, was arguably the best conference in college football after going 13-6 against the other leagues. And the 13-6 was even more impressive when you considered who they beat. But it's not been good ever since for the Pac-12. On the other hand, the Big 12 is clearly not the best of the Power Five, but they've gained so much respect and credibility playing well the past season and a half. It started in postseason after the 2016 season, in which they went 4-2 after a disastrous run during the regular season, in which Oklahoma lost to Ohio State and Houston, and the other teams didn't look good against their non-conference opponents, but they rallied in the postseason, did the Big 12, and then had a nice season in 2017. And suddenly people somewhat respect the Big 12. I don't know how long that's going to last, considering if you look at the NFL draft statistics for the Big 12, it's deplorable. And on the other end of the spectrum, that typically translates 4 years later, 3 and 4 years later, to the NFL draft statistics are the recruiting numbers for the Big 12, and they're awful. So I don't know if I think the Big 12 has just capitalized with some good coaching and with this Oklahoma team coming together with the best talent in the league for these couple years. Texas is going to be a factor, but top to bottom, I don't see the Big 12 playing as well over the next few years as it did this past season and at the conclusion of 2016, because the numbers just show it that it's not recruiting on the same level as the other leagues, especially the Big Ten, the ACC, and the SEC. And that's also reflected 3 and 4 years later at the NFL draft. So that was my long and laborious take on the Pac-12's condition and the Big 12. All right, let's finish up with the Utah Utes. And I saved them for last because I know that just everyone out there has been waiting more so for this Utah future schedules breakdown than any other team in the Pac-12. Wink, wink. All right, 2018, no disrespect to Kyle Whittingham, who's one of the great postseason coaches, won another postseason game against West Virginia this year at the Heart of Dallas Bowl. And what is Kyle Whittingham? Something like 12-1 in the postseason. And of course, Urban Meyer had a great run in his couple postseason appearances at Utah. So the Utes just never lose come bowl play. Unfortunately for them, they typically are playing in like the Foster Farms Bowl, so it doesn't matter too much. But they did knock off Alabama, of course, following the 2008 season at the Sugar Bowl. Brian Johnson with a huge game against Nick Saban's club, and won the game against with Alex Smith at quarterback, defeating Pitt, who had won the Big East at the Fiesta Bowl in 2004. As you can see, I'm used to saying like 2022, so I keep saying 2004. Of course, Urban Meyer's team went undefeated that season when the Utes won the Fiesta Bowl, and then a few years later with Kyle Whittingham defeating Alabama. All right, what do they have coming up? Coming off the 7-6 campaign, 2018, it's Weber State, Northern Illinois, and BYU. Garbage. 2019, Utah's got BYU on the road, Northern Illinois, and Idaho State. Garbage. 2020, BYU, Montana State, and Wyoming. Okay, this is worse than Washington State. Utah in 2021's got Weber State, BYU, and San Diego State. I'm about to just chuck this mic. This is atrocious. This is an embarrassment. They have scheduled no one. No one. I am looking at schedules going to 2025, and Utah has nobody. They have a home and home with Baylor in 2023 and 24. Otherwise, nothing. A lot of Wyoming, a lot of San Diego State. Of course, San Diego State plays the Pac-12. They might as well move into the Pac-12. Weber State. Utah found it very, very crucial that they schedule 2 home dates with Weber State in 2018 and 21. Very crucial that they made sure that Montana State was on the schedule a couple times. They needed Wyoming to be on the schedule a couple times, especially that date that they're playing in Laramie in 2020. BYU's all over this schedule. 2018, 19, 20, and 21 and 22. They're playing BYU the next 5 years. That's okay. I know that that's the holy war. It's a huge game, especially there. I got my education on it from afar to a certain extent, but also in dealing with the fine folks at SB Nation for the Utah site. I believe it's called the Block U. And the guy Shane, who used to come on here and educate me on the holy war, BYU, Utah. But Utah schedule somebody else. This is the worst. This is worse than Washington State because at least the Cougars down the road are going to be playing Wisconsin home and home. And I also think that Kansas State was mixed in there and Texas Tech and somebody else. So they finally get their acts together. Utah, there's nothing here. So there's hope in 2023 because they still have to fill out the last 2 slots of the schedule. And after that, they have a bunch of openings. But they've got nothing but home and home against Baylor. That's awful. Utah, garbage. So I'm going to tag the particular team sites, the official team sites for the likes of Utah and Washington State to let them know that they're not playing anyone and that they need to schedule somebody because their schedules are garbage and they're not credible when they're playing garbage schedules. And then, of course, as I keep promising, I'm going to unleash my schedule formula for the non-conference scheduling. All right, one more look at the chat, then I'm going to let you guys go to sleep for the night. Florida and Miami, you people are relentless when it comes to the Gators and the Canes, just going back and forth, going at it. I cannot wait for that game in 2 years because I'm probably going to get about 50,000 views. Shouldn't these videos get more views than they do? We'll have to work on that. So you guys help me out. Tell your college football friends and family about Mark Rogers TV. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If there's anybody on the chat that's been watching at any point, or if you've jumped on late and you missed the prior discussion, we not only talked about the Pac-12 and the future schedules in that conference, but I responded to everything that I could possibly find that was worthwhile in the chat to respond to. So there was a lot of fun football talk about all sorts of things, ranging from Kent State to the 1990 national championship split between Colorado and Georgia Tech and a lot of other stuff. So I appreciate you guys jumping on. You guys are hardcore college football fans, and that's what we love. And again, please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have yet to do so. And if you love the audio, which apparently you don't because you like the live chat, but if anybody out there watching loves the audio and that's the best way to consume this, then you go to Google Play, iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher and just search Mark Rogers TV. Thank you so much for the support. Give me your suggestions of what you'd like to hear and see in terms of content at Mark Rogers TV. We've got a rivalry week coming. I will explain that in the future. And I've got a huge week planned coming up this next week, talking tons of college football with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry. Thanks so much. You guys have a great time. George, thank you so much. Your comments are hilarious and they ring true some of the time. And I don't say that in a bad way because they're always hilarious, but sometimes they really hit home. And a lot of the things that you say, boy, I wish I could take off on. I would love to be the czar of scheduling and the College Football Playoff Committee. Give me that job tomorrow and I would run with it. Fill in, Ryan, whoever I'm missing, Big Poppy JT, Dennis, all you guys, anybody I'm missing. Some of you guys have probably jumped on for the first time, and I appreciate you jumping on board and would love to be able to call you out by name in the future. So make yourself known and let me know that you're there. And you guys make all this work with the engagement and the comments and suggestions, because this is a dialogue. When I say the voice of college football, I mean, yes, I've got a voice and I'm speaking about myself, the voice of college football, but it's you as well. Your voice is crucial in making this the best college football YouTube channel that there is. And of course, we've got the voice of the best contributors around as well. So we appreciate it. I may be back tomorrow, maybe not. Going to spend a lot of time with my daughter on Saturday, but I will definitely be back with more chats on Sunday and then throughout next week as well. You guys have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.